So, welcome. I think this is the 48th webinar that we've done over the last couple of years. And myself, Christina Silver, and Sarah Bullock, my colleague, are here today. And we run the CAQDAS networking project, which is all about raising awareness and building capacity in the use of a whole range of different digital tools designed to facilitate qualitative and mixed methods analysis. And we're going to be talking about some of those today. Before we get on to the focus of our session today, just to remind you of some new initiatives that we've got on our website, which you might be interested in. So we're going to be talking about AI for qualitative analysis today, and we have a whole range of new pages on our website on that topic. So looking at different tools, ethics, and various other topics around this hot issue of how we're all dealing with the new AI era. And we've also launched a blog in the last few months where there's lots of really interesting articles, some of them written by ourselves, some of them are guest posts. And that doesn't have to be about AI, it can be about any aspect of the use of tools. And we are very keen to host your articles on our blog about any aspect of the use of digital tools for qualitative and mixed methods analysis. So if you have an idea or a reflection or something, then do get in touch and we'd be very happy to talk to you about writing for our blog. In terms of events, we run lots of methods events. You can see the next few coming up. We've got some additional ones to that list before the summer. That you can find on our website. Sarah, I think, is putting all the links in the chat at the moment, so thank you for that. And we've got 2 more webinars already arranged before the summer, also on aspects of the use of AI for qualitative analysis. But today I want to really get on straight away to what we're all here for today, which is to listen to Matt Wood talk about tinkering with large language models as an approach to qualitative analysis. So just by way of a short introduction to Matt, to let you know that Dr. Matt Wood is an assistant professor in the Department of Computer and Information Sciences at Northumbria University in the UK. His doctoral research focused on digital sexualities, which he completed at Newcastle University, and many of his publications are in that field. He's also worked in the qualitative methods field and is a contributor to Victoria Clark and Virginia Brown's work on thematic analysis and story completion. But Matt also has an interest in the complicated and messy relationships that humans hold with digital technologies. And he now works predominantly in the field of human-computer interaction. And to investigate those relationships, Matt utilizes playful qualitative methods, and he's going to show us into this space a little bit this afternoon by talking about how it might be possible to tinker with large language models as an approach to qualitative analysis. Sarah's been putting some links about Matt, including his university profile and YouTube channel, if you want to find out more afterwards. But while he is presenting, please do use the chat space in Zoom to pose any questions that you have for Matt, or any comments or reflections that come to mind as he's presenting, and myself and Sarah will collate those and pose them to Matt at the end in our Q&A session. So I'll finish up now and pass over to you, Matt. Thank you very much for being here. We're very much looking forward to hearing your thoughts on what is a very intriguing title to your presentation, Tinkering with Large Language Models. Thank you.
Hello, everyone. Thank you very much for having me, and thank you for that very kind introduction. As Christina said, my name's Matt Wood, and I am currently at Northumbria University. Before that, I was a digital learning developer at Durham University for a few years. And it was during that period, so I got very excited about the potential of digital technology for the future of higher education during the pandemic. So I took up this post at Durham University, and as I was at Durham, ChatGPT came out, and I was like, Okay. This is probably the thing that I need to be focusing on. Certainly at that time, it was in the teaching and learning in higher education space, but that has kind of evolved now into my current role, where I'm assistant professor in computer and information sciences, but specializing in human computer interaction. So uh, that social computing, people and technology, and my current role is that I am a program leader for the Center of Doctoral Training in Citizen-Centered AI. So the idea is that we have a lot of disciplinary experts in different areas who are very interested in the application of AI for their specific domain expertise. So we have people interested in health and in education is another key one. Also AI in the cultural sector. So the idea is we train them the basics of AI, but also we train them in design perspectives, also give them a bit of a background in governance and AI, and law, which is another big part of the puzzle here. And then they go off and do some very interesting research. So we've got the first cohort who are coming to the end of their training year. The second cohort are just about to start with us, and we're going to have three more cohorts after that. So if you are interested, then let me know. You may also be able to find the citizen-centered AI pages on Northumbria, but happy to have a bit more of a conversation about that later. Um, so, as Christina touched on, I have a bit of a background in qualitative analysis, specifically through my work with Victoria Clark of Brown and Clark fame, which is actually how me and Christina originally met through a summer school that they organised quite some time ago now. Um, and my perspective on qualitative analysis, I suppose my contribution to their work has been around kind of playful approaches to thematic analysis and championing this idea of play, games and play kind of comes into that as well through the computer science lens. You can see on the slide here, these were doodles that I did about Christians for my undergraduate project. So these are gay Christians. That was the topic of my undergraduate dissertation. And for each participant, I did one of these playful doodles, listening to the transcript, listening to what they were saying, reading through the transcript as well, but making this rich kind of map, visual map of what my participants were talking about. And this served as a really kind of helpful tool to kind of familiarize myself with the data, but also for me, when I look at these doodles, I can see an evolution of my analysis. And it's far too small for you to see, probably, but on the page here, it does say battle on a couple of these doodles. And actually, the driving force behind my analysis became this idea of a battle. That gay Christians were fighting a battle against religious homophobia. Um, so I'm really interested in the idea of play, of the as we'll touch on later, the thematic analysis kind of stages are sometimes set up as these rigid things that you move through. But actually, if you engage with Brown and Clark's work and qualitative analysis more broadly, these are often invitations to engage with your data. These aren't rigid rules that you have to follow like commandments. And actually, the flexibility of thematic analysis allows for that playful approach. This also overlaps into my dual identity. I was recently interviewed about kind of dual professional identities because I'm also a puppeteer, and it's a big part of my professional identity as well. So my partner runs Newcastle Puppetry Festival. We have a company that we run together, and recently in January I was making a marionettes puppet. So marionette is a puppet on a string, puppets on strings. And this is an interesting marionette because it's made by a very prolific puppeteer called Stephen Mottram, who is very interested in installing human-like movements into objects. And this design of a puppet is quite a complex object, which is incredible, done with sort of incredible precision in order to get certain movements that replicate human life form. And working with Stephen, this is me. In fact, I think this is all Stephen's hands, so he did give me quite a lot of help in this. But kind of sitting alongside a sort of master in their craft who's, been doing this for many years, it does remind me of um, the perspective of qualitative analysis as being a craft, something that you work on, something that you get better at over time. You have certain tools in your toolbox, and I know in the QAQDAS community we often talk about these different tools, these different softwares that give us different things, but also a pen is a tool, and Christina particularly talks about this, and a highlighter is a tool, and we can draw on these things in interesting different ways. And really, this is the perspective that I want to take forward as we start talking about AI and the potential that AI has within the qualitative analysis process, and how that's going to evolve. So I'm going to keep this as a purposefully kind of provocative statement, maybe, that deep learning is amazing. I I am of the opinion that, you know, it's a little bit like electricity. I've heard AI being spoken about in those terms. It's not like the internet necessarily. It's not we can think of it as like a flash in the pan, and I think there's a role for thinking about AI hype. But actually, if we think about what AI is doing, particularly through the notion of neural nets, deep neural nets, they are delivering cutting edge results in a myriad of different areas. These examples, and a lot of my AI examples, come from Jeremy Howard, who's well worth checking out. I can direct you towards some of his work. So self-driving cars, I mean, interesting. I think there's been a promise of self-driving cars that hasn't quite been delivered yet. But if we think about what is capable, what these AI models are doing, you know, they are recognizing objects in real time and making calculations about what they are and what's going on. And from a purely technical perspective, it it is amazing what's going on there. Likewise, medicine, there's a huge conversation to be happening about the role that AI should play in practice, but actually from sort of image detection and detection of tumors and detection of other sort of health conditions, we are seeing cutting edge results. Likewise, biology, protein folding. Many of you will be familiar with kind of AlphaFold, or you may or may not be familiar with that. AlphaGo, which is the chess playing, Go playing, grandmaster beating stuff. So there is so much amazing stuff going on. I think when we start to interrogate these things, we come up with some interesting questions. Of course, we do, around ethics and the how much agency we want to give machines, or specifically the role that AI has in decision making. Can we trust AI to drive us around? Maybe we can't, and that's fine. But I think we can think about AI in different ways, human in the loop perspectives, um, in game playing, maybe the stakes are a little bit lower. Robotics, again, it depends what the purpose of the robot is, and what it should do. So behind all of this innovation, this amazing complexity, these cutting edge results, I just wanted to use an example because it's on my mind. We had someone from Hills Pet Food talk to the CCAI students, the citizen centered doctoral students, yesterday. Again, using neural networks, not just neural networks, but a range of machine learning models to come up with sort of cutting edge research in that area. Um, but behind all of that, or behind a lot of that, is this notion of a neural network. And to try and demystify it a little bit, we can think of a neural network as just a function. It's a mathematical function which is extremely flexible, and it has lots and lots of different parameters, which are the little circles on the screen right now. And initially, a neural net can't do anything, but using something called stochastic gradient descent, you can teach it to do almost anything if you give it examples. So when the students start with me, one of the first things I ask them to do is train a model. And this is the classic model of the classic question of whether something is a pie or whether something is a cake. I'm sure it keeps you up at night. So we have lots of pictures of pies here, and that is our first class. And then we have lots of pictures of cakes, and that is our second class. So we're telling the computer all of these are pies, all of these are cakes. And then you can do this yourself on something called teachable machines. You hit train the model, and then all the model does is it takes a subset of each of these samples, and it passes them through a neural net. And initially, it gets it wrong, which is on the left side of the screen here. These kind of losses and accuracies per epoch, which is the amount of times you pass through the neural net. So it gets it wrong, it gets it wrong, it gets it wrong, and then eventually it gets it right. So that this cake that I've put into the model at the end here, that was not part of the training set, and that is a very important thing. So this is something that it hasn't seen before, and it knows that it is a cake. And although it's a silly example, that task for a computer was 10 years or so ago. That is not something that a computer was able to do, and now it is. So what's happening here is, to kind of build on that diagram that I gave you earlier, is that we transfer the image into numbers, and I'll talk a little bit about how that's done in a moment. And then there's just a bunch of random numbers here, where there's three classifiers at the end here, but we could think of it as two, or cake, pie, cake, or Jaffa cake, and initially it's getting it wrong. It updates the weights in the next epoch, and it gets it wrong, it gets it wrong, it gets it wrong, it gets it right. Okay. Everything that the computer is seeing is transferred into a number. So this is just a way of, so the computer is not seeing a picture of a cake. It is transferring that data into an RGB value, which it is then able to kind of observe those differences. And even though that's a silly example to kind of teach you the basics of what deep learning is and what these models can do, um, it's already got a huge amount of application. So the minced data set, this is handwriting. So this is a data set of handwritten numbers, and you can teach the machine using exactly the same principle whether something is a digit 1 through 9. Likewise, you can take environmental sound and then you can transfer that into image data, and you can do some kind of interesting stuff about sound detection or fraud detection. I think that's a particularly interesting one. So the kind of mouse clicks, we can learn what are human mouse clicks, and we can learn what is likely to be machine mouse clicks. So as I touched on earlier, if we start to think about how this might apply to the qualitative analysis process, um, I think we can contrast these approaches in a way, because machine learning models are predictive models, and fall perhaps more firmly in the kind of quantitative camp. You know, that you have a model that you then make predictions of, and I'm interested, like I said earlier, in that more flexible approach to thematic analysis and qualitative analysis more broadly, and qualitative analysis as an adventure, as a something that we can grapple with in interesting ways, and that we're not necessarily looking for a specific answer, that we are making sense of that messy complexity. And the way I've typically kind of formulated that is through the way I've addressed the complexity in qualitative analysis is by going back to my pen and paper. That is my happy place. And you kindly shared my YouTube channel, I think, Sarah, in the chat. I've got a little video about how I go about doing that manually. But then let's think about how AI might be applied in a more playful, flexible kind of way. So if I'm actually going to skip over this very quickly, but we essentially, what I want you to do is think about a language model in the same way as we thought about our classifier earlier, and we are just predicting the next word or token in a sequence of words. And the way that this is done in a language model, and don't be too scared by the next slide, because I can walk you through what's happening, is we just have a series of neural nets. So this is taking our function, our very basic sort of, well, it's not basic, but the principle behind it is very basic. It's just a bunch of weights that are being updated, and we're teaching it through examples. And this is Jeremy Howard and Sebastian Rudder gave a neural net lots and lots of sentences from Wikipedia, such as this one, which is The Birds is a 1963 American natural horror thriller film produced and directed by Alfred. And this is the interactive part of the webinar. Any suggestions on what comes after this in the chat? Yay, Hitchcock. Okay. So what's happening here is, if the model guesses Hitchcock, it will be rewarded, but if it guesses something else, it would be penalized. So the model is trying to maximize that reward. And it's trying to find a set of weights for this function that makes it more likely to protect Hitchcock. And then there's but so the second sentence here: Annie previously dated Mitch, but ended it due to Mitch's cold, overbearing mother, Lydia, who dislikes any woman in Mitch's. Any any advances on what the next word should be? Life. Look at that. Yes. So there's actually, yeah. Basically, it's not as easy a question, right? But in order for the language model to know that, uh, it has to know an awful lot of stuff, basically. So this is all just to say that these language models have to compress, and the relationship between machine learning and compression is quite a complex one, but we have to have the ability to make these kind of rich hierarchies of abstraction so that the language model can build on it. So basically, these language models know an awful lot of stuff, and through the neural network, we can think about how this information is progressed. So, if we think about a typical computer program, we can put into words, or we can put into a recipe quite easily what it's doing behind the scenes. So something that I do, I'm not a big QAQDAS user, but I do use a search function, say, in big data sets. So a program is quite happy to do these kind of basic tasks, these kind of step-by-step tasks, simple tasks. So if we think about the typical things that we're asking a computer to do in QAQDAS, those are fairly simple. Well, simple for a computer, right? It can file things in certain ways. It can deal with lots and lots of data. But what we're thinking about with language models is something that is a little bit more complex. And we can't break it down in the same kind of detail. So what we need to do is think about this notion of weights, and these weights that get updated based on the performance of our model. So, like I say, gets it wrong, gets it wrong, gets it wrong, gets it right. But at the end of this process, at the end of this training process, what we have is something that looks the same. So we can deploy, after this training process, we can deploy a model in the same way we would a regular computer program. But that model is then fixed in time. And this is a really, really important thing to understand, is when we're using language models, say ChatGPT, we're not training a model at the same time. I mean, there are some complicated things about what ChatGPT is doing with your data, and actually they could be, fine tuning another model, or they could be doing something behind the scenes. But actually, a trained model is something that is static. So let's have a little think about how we then can use a language model in qualitative analysis. So again, I don't want to scare people too much. I'm going to try and make this a little bit bigger. What I have been doing is getting an API key for Claude, which is a relatively straightforward thing that you can all do. Um, you just have to. It's yeah. I don't need to show you my login details or anything, but basically all you do is sign up, which means you are able to talk to Claude. I mean, I can. Everyone can talk to Claude or ChatGPT through the chat interface, but essentially what this enables. Oh, this is essentially what this enables is for me to implement this functionality into programmatically. So let me talk you through exactly what's happening in this Jupyter notebook. So a Jupyter notebook is just something where I can put in a little thing and get a response. So this is, a very basic, probably the most basic function of all is 1 + 1 = 2. But then, and I'm going to define a sum. Oh, this is risky. Okay. Oh no. Anyway, basically, what I'm trying to do is, and someone who can code could probably do this better than me. Once I've got 1 + 1 = 2, you can define that into a function, which means you don't have to write 1 + 1 = 2 every time. You can call on that function and then do stuff interesting. And that basically is what coding is you do a complicated thing and often then like just define that into a function and then call on that function to do interesting stuff. So what's then is happening here is I am taking some input text. I use yeah, so this won't make a whole lot of sense, but this is just a piece of text that was from an interview transcript. I use something to stay in contact closely with home, which I've defined as input text, which means when I call on input text, it prints that out. Then all I do is call on Anthropic to be able to use a language model within a piece of code. So I'm just setting up a message here. I'm calling on a model, which is the latest version of Claude. You don't have to worry about max tokens or temperature. But then what I'm doing here is I'm putting in a system message. So I'm asking the language model to act as a research assistant specializing in qualitative analysis. Your task is to provide a selection of pithy codes to label the specific data fragment provided for the user to select from. You should prioritize new, different, and creative perspectives. Your task is to provide the code suggestions as a Python list only. And this isn't going to work if I run it, but because I haven't set up my API key properly, but essentially what happens is it gives me a whole list of codes. And this is interesting for me because it's breaking down the coding process. It's thinking about coding. For me, coding is a really important part of immersing myself in the data and thinking through what data means. But sometimes it's hard to kind of get going. Students specifically end up with codes that are a little bit surface level and a little bit. So you spend a lot of effort trying to be like, oh no, not particularly good code. It doesn't really say anything. Whereas with a little bit of code here, we can develop something that's quite interesting. So what I'm going to do is show you very quickly how I've implemented this into a piece of software. Now, I say this is a piece of software, but it's so super basic. I'm not a software engineer by any description, and I could build this. So it is not beyond the realm of possibility for any one of you. It's actually called fast HTML. Is the thing that I built this in. So actually, this whole thing is just a piece of Python code, which I could show you, but it doesn't really matter. All you have to know is behind the scenes here, I am using that system prompt that I just showed you in order to generate some codes. And all this is doing, the software bit is kind of formatting that nicely. Now, what I thought I'd do is share with you some data that is not interview data, because a lot of the current thinking about AI, um, it integrated into software, is using interview data, whereas this data that I have is postcard data. So um, this is sort of public project to do with the puppet festival, actually getting people to write postcard stories about their experience of the city. Um, and I have just written this into a Word document. And you can see something like this. This is the, I'll make this a little bit bigger for you. Um, Tell us your Benwell and Scotswood story. How did you get here? What do you like about living here? What are your favorite parts? So Swing Bridge, Millennium Bridge. You know, if I'm coding that kind of data, it's quite difficult to know what to do with it. But if I put it in my fast coder, which, if you remember, is just that prompt that I showed you, it's given me a whole bunch of interesting codes that I could, and some of these I could be like, okay, river crossing generations. Okay, generations. I feel like that's a little bit far fetched because but Swing Bridge, Millennium Bridge, something about architecture, something about transport, something about so architectural. And obviously, this is an optimum sort of time to do like a full thematic analysis, but architectural experiences of the city. And then I hit code, and this is very basic implementation because it's just taking the thing and then putting the code on it. Again, when I walked across the bridge, I could see bright, beautiful colors. So let's see what it's coming up with there. Visual awakening, bridge's vantage point, chromatic encounter. Um, okay, lovely. So again, sensory journeys across the city. So this for me is kind of an interesting application of AI. Thinking about AI, the components of AI, what AI is doing, specifically language models, and how language models are a certain application of AI. They're making certain kind of abstractions about the world. And then we can use some of that value as a qualitative researcher wanting to do our stuff. Um, so I think there are definitely applications of sort of putting things into a language model and being like, okay, what are some preliminary themes here? What are some preliminary ideas? Um, but also, I think we can use these models selectively as we go across an analysis process, um, also prompting AI to respond in different ways. So that the Jupyter notebook that I showed you earlier, you can play around with that prompt. Um, and think about, okay, you could get it to code like a pirate if you really wanted to, but you could get it to code in different ways, and it's something that you can then harness and use for your own purposes. But also, you're not giving over entire control over to these language models, and you haven't done some of that processing yourself. And yes, I am interested to know your thoughts as well about what AI applications that you think are interesting of AI, and any thoughts on what I've spoken about today. Um, okay, so that's it from me.
Thank you so much, Matt. Thank you. I really, really enjoyed your presentation. I thought it was particularly helpful as a sort of starting point to understand what's going on with the models. I think that's a really important baseline to start from. So sometimes I wonder, with all of the changes in the developments in the technologies, how many of us as researchers are able to keep abreast of what's actually happening, what's at the base of those models. And I felt that you really presented that really, really helpfully. So thank you so much. Really engaging. A few questions from us, please. Other participants, if you have any thoughts or reflections as we have a chat with Matt now, do please do post those. Could you speak a little bit more perhaps about the stages in the qualitative analysis process in which you tend to use the large language models, or that they could be used in? So you've said as an exploratory stage just now to see what they're coming out with. So you get demonstrated the task of getting the model to suggest some codes. But are there any particular phases that you felt in the analysis process that you see this sort of thing as particularly helpful to our human interpretation?
Yeah. I think that is very, yeah, interesting question, because I think we do think about right now AI as being a kind of tool for familiarization, um, and that kind of first step of analysis. Um, but I would also kind of problematize that a little bit, because in that initial stage of analysis, when you're kind of familiarizing yourself, you're kind of doing that first coding process, you're going through quite a lot of analytic work. And I think so, installing that right at the beginning, you've got then AI as a kind of partner
Mhm.
as you go along. Now, I haven't coded an entire data set using this tool that I
Mhm.
kind of demonstrated, but I think that would be a really interesting process to go through, because then your initial kind of coding framework has kind of come as a collaboration. But importantly, you've been a human in the loop along that
Mhm.
entire process. So you have had some agency over what that decision is. Then what kind of, as you go through that coding process as a experienced qualitative analysis, uh, if you have some experience in it, you start
Mhm.
thinking about codes and start making those kind of abstractions. I think going into the next stage, if you just sort of dumped all of those codes into a language model and said, come up with a analysis for me. Hey, who knows? It might do an amazing job at that. But I think all the while, be thinking about how much power and how much agency you're giving to the language model along that process.
Yeah, that's really helpful. It absolutely was interesting to me to see all of the different labels it was suggesting for such a short piece of data that you fed it. And I really noticed myself looking through those and thinking, oh no, I wouldn't use that. That's not quite right. I hadn't thought of that. Or, oh, that's a really nice way of phrasing it. So it was sort of challenging the way that I might otherwise have labeled the segment of data as well, which is quite a nice, as you say, a companionship, the dialogue as it were, to give you some new ideas along the way, which you can choose to accept or not as you go on. So really interesting. Thank you. Many researchers in our experience at the CAQDAS Networking Project are interested in exploring the use of our AI for qualitative data analysis in the context of trying to save time. Can you speak to your thoughts on that? As a sort of motivator in relation to your framing of qualitative data analysis as a playful and creative craft, as it were.
Yeah, this is really interesting because so every so often I approach a language model, as many people do, with a data set that I don't necessarily have a properly anonymized data set or a data set that I have permission to sort of give a language model to, is like, and then analyze this. And I think I'm always, every time I do that, I'm more impressed with the output that comes from it. But it always tries to give me more. So I could be like, oh, could you just code this data set and actually, talked a little bit about how these language models work and how they're not just, they're looking for a likely scenario. And actually, they want to, often they're so eager to please that they want to just fill in all of the steps for you. And I think this is the real challenge because, if we're thinking about them as a time-saving resource, which I think they can be utilized properly. Chatting with you and Christina earlier about where do we want to save time and what are the valuable things and what are the things that we can hand over. But I think if we've like, okay, here's a fully formed analysis. And it's like, okay, now what? It's like, but that wasn't me. I had no role at all in the formulation of what that was. Whereas I think if you start using them a little bit more purposefully to do specific tasks, then yes, not wanting to be too much of an evangelist to my own approach, but I just think that means that you might save some time because actually, yeah, trying to come up with an initial coding framework can just be like torturous sometimes. And actually, if it can speed that up and get things rolling a bit better, then I think that's great. Likewise, if we're doing some grouping and it's giving some suggestions and we're thinking, okay, maybe we do these, maybe we don't. But I think, yeah, to view it as just like, right, just do that task and then it just does it. And then we just feel redundant and just like, oh, well, what's the role for us anymore? So I think it is a framing thing. And to expand on your question, I guess, a bit, like thinking about how they're solved to us, like these are going to take all of these tasks off your hands rather than help you do the things that you already do better.
Yeah, absolutely. Really, really important reflections. We have a few questions from the audience, which is fantastic. So we have one that I'm going to read out from Grant, and then Alex has their hand up. Alex, if you'd like to ask your question using your audio, that's perfect. I think, Alex, your hand was up first, actually. Are you happy to use your audio?
Yeah, sure, if you can hear me.
Great. Thanks, Alex.
Yes, so I really like the idea of using it for familiarization. And I mean, I was thinking, indeed, that you don't want complete sort of de-skilling or outsourcing of the interpretive process to the LLM and come up with this whole kind of new framework by itself. But I wondered, I mean, is one approach to kind of do some sort of separate manual coding? Maybe if you're doing a document analysis, you take a sample of documents, do some initial exploratory coding oneself, and then at the next stage, you do some kind of LLM type analysis, feed in, definitions or what have you. Because I'm thinking when it comes to writing these things up, sending it to a journal, getting it peer reviewed, etc., they're probably not going to be very happy if you just say, well, I kind of just brainstormed on ChatGPT and it kind of helped me come up with this framework. Because I imagine they want some sort of, like transparency in the process. So I wonder whether these kind of almost separated out stages of using the language model after doing a bit of manual coding might be helpful. Do you know what I mean?
Definitely. And I think again, we were chatting earlier, we're at such an early stage really with AI, and I know it's becoming cliche to say, but almost a nice framework is like it's like the internet in 1992. We are in such early day and figuring that out. And if we look at where we are now with the internet and where we were then and how it's evolved and how it will co-evolve. So I think your principle there is super interesting of that you might go through separate coding frameworks. I think is interesting. It might be a challenge for us to be more transparent in our reporting processes. I mean, how specific are we? Always when we write up papers, it's like, well, you coded the data, we did this. Actually, a lot of people aren't that specific about how they generated the codes, and ultimately, I believe that a qualitative analysis kind of lives and dies by the quality of the analysis. Are you saying something interesting about your data? And ultimately, I don't think it is it controversial to say. I don't think it matters how you got there if what you're saying is valid and worthwhile. I think the risk giving too much agency to these models, too much power to these models, means that actually you do come up with unsubstantiated claims or stuff. It's like, oh, could you tell me a bit more about that? It's like, well, no, actually, because this is all just, the language model made it up. My view is that if there's a human in the loop there, that makes things a bit more straightforward.
Yeah. No, it's interesting. Any technology that actually encourages us to be more transparent about our process, in my view, is a really good thing. Because as you just alluded to, Matt, the real black box often around what we actually did with our materials, particularly in the context of sort of a 7,000 word journal article. We don't dedicate a lot of time to actually saying, well, this is what I did. So actually, if these models are now on the stage, and if we're trying to use them and are wanting to say, look, I did, and we're therefore being asked to be really clear about how, that can only be a good thing for research in general, I think. And this idea of transparency is also something that Colleen and Grant have just posted about in the chat as well. So Grant asked a question saying, I find the documentation using large language models to be particularly tricky for the reasons you mentioned. So constantly moving baselines. I noticed, says Grant, that you set your LLM temperature to 0 to minimize randomization or kind of creativity in the model, which may be an important parameter to actually document. Do you have any thoughts about how documenting, about the process of documenting how we leverage these models?
Yes. I think I think documenting methods is something where there is a fair amount of variability anyway. Yeah, certainly I think the temperature variable is something to kind of play around with in that spirit of, hey, there's this new thing called language models. Let's have let's see, putting that up, putting that down. I've done a bunch of stuff as well of initially when I was playing around with these models is I put in a whole bunch of text and put asterisks around the bit that I wanted them to code and and then be like, see this in context. So code this thing in the context of the rest of it. But interestingly, didn't make any difference particularly. I was getting just as much the abstractions that the language model was kind of coming up with on its own, sort of based on its training, was enough to kind of spark kind of some interesting codes that I could then select from or edit. And yeah, so in a roundabout way, I don't know with reporting, we're then also in a little bit of the sort of replication area of actually my analysis, and maybe that has been informed by a conversation with a friend. It's also been informed by a conversation, my disciplinary training. It's been informed by a whole myriad of things that you would never put in a method section itself. So I don't know. I'm just toying around with this idea of, okay, can we document all of that to the nth degree? Is it important that we do that? Or again, I think also just quickly on that with the psychology, psychologists, we are very adamant about our kind of method section. And actually, I think that's really good. We're quite protective of our method section. But actually, if you go to the humanities, quite often they're not as sort of rigid, or certain researchers in the humanities. It's like, well, no, that's your data. Like, it's not, you don't need a method section in exactly the same way. So it's just something to sort of consider in this whole discussion.
Thank you, Matt. Thank you. There was a question in the chat about best places to go to read up about using these models in our work, and Christina has started to address that question with posting a few resources. It would be lovely, Matt, if you did have the time after the webinar, if you had a couple of golden nuggets that you know of that you point your students to on your course, to share those with Christina and myself, and we can then add them in when we send out the recording of this webinar. But we are going to have to stop there because it's almost the top of the hour. So I want to thank Matt very, very much on behalf of Christina and myself at the CAQDAS Networking Project for sharing your insights with us today. Thank you. And it's been a real pleasure to have you here, very much thought-provoking. For everyone who's been here with us, thanks for your time. Just before you go, do have a look at our next webinars in the series. We've got the next one on the 11th of June, as Christina's showing on her slide just now. And we've also got other training courses coming up too. So here are some more links to other places to go to see what we're up to and to get in touch with us. So all that remains to be said now is to say thanks so much for spending your time with us today. Thank you, Matt, again, for contributing to the webinar series. If you're interested in contributing yourselves to the webinar series, we're always interested to hear from you and have conversations about what you might present. So thanks, everybody. Keep well, keep safe, and thanks again to Matt for your time today. Bye-bye now.
Bye-bye.